We turn now to France, where, unlike the US, voters rejected populist nationalism and opted to leave their presidency in the hands of a man who may have been an outsider, but was one from deep within the establishment. As Britain went Brexit and America went Trump, why did France reject Marine Le Pen and vote for Emmanuel Macron? This is the question Arthur Goldhammer has attempted to answer in two pieces of writing, one for Foreign Affairs and one for the Baffler, both recommended. Dr. Goldhammer is based at the Centre for European Studies at Harvard University, and he has an interesting thesis. Mr. Macron won because of who he isn't as much as who he is.
The French people are really not quite sure who Macron is. A fraction of them have been convinced, or perhaps the more accurate thing would be to say seduced by Macron. He has had a talent throughout his life for seducing particularly older people. He's had a number of mentors who've helped him on his way throughout his career. Some of them are quite prominent in French government life and have been picking talent for French governments for many years now. People like Alain Menck and Jacques Attali, who look over each graduating class from the National School of Administration, which trains the top administrators in France. And they're the people who recommended Macron to the Rothschild Bank when he went into investment banking, and then who advised Hollande on bringing him back into government. He also served under Sarkozy. So he's been around behind the scenes, has never been elected to office before, but he does have a fair amount of experience as a technocrat and advisor.
This article in Foreign Affairs, I had no idea that he went to the National School of Administration, and even if I had known that, I wouldn't have realised the extent to which it is, as you say, the nursery of the French elite. So he had this kind of silver spoon as he approached his ambitious trajectory, but also he had the real advantage of not being Marine Le Pen, right?
Absolutely. The exit polls show that at least 40% of the people who voted for Macron were really voting against Le Pen. The number who voted in favor of his program, which remains to this date rather vague, is much smaller, probably around 18%, according to a poll I saw tonight on French TV News. So this was a vote to block Le Pen, who still arouses fear in approximately two-thirds of the French people. And whatever fears she's aroused throughout the campaign were multiplied in the last 2 weeks, particularly after the televised debate last Wednesday night, when she came on like gangbusters, barely allowed Macron to get in a word edgewise, and barely lowered her voice throughout the 3 hours of debate. So I think that frightened quite a number of viewers.
You turned this rather wonderfully into comic strip characters in the Baffler, and I really recommend, we'll put the link on our website, but you say Robin triumphant in France, masked Robin defeats Sheena, Queen of the Jungle.
Yes, exactly. That was my more lighthearted take on the election, and there is a sense in which Macron has been the perennial sidekick. He was Hollande's sidekick, and that's why I thought of Batman. And he is a bit of Robin as Batman's sidekick, and he is a bit of a masked man. We don't really know what his true identity is, so that's why that analogy occurred to me. In any case, he really won Hollande's indulgence for the 2 years he served in government. Hollande, in interviews that he imprudently gave to journalists while he was still president, identified Macron as his spiritual son, so he had more or less adopted him. And then Macron abandoned him, left him in the lurch, quit the government. Before quitting, he had formed his own movement, but Hollande refused to heed the warnings of his advisors that Macron was planning to run against him. So Hollande was the last to realize this, and before he did, Macron quit the government and announced that he was running for president.
Gosh, this is fascinating. I'm also fascinated by why France rejected Le Pen so comprehensively when we've seen the rise of populist nationalism in Britain with Brexit. We've seen it in the United States with Trump. Was France aware of a sense of responsibility to put up a hand to that kind of movement and say stop?
Yes, I think you've put your finger on two key events. The Brexit vote reminded the French that as much as they may grumble about the European Union, they really do depend on it. 70% of them do not want to leave the euro, which Marine Le Pen had promised to do. And she had promised to hold a Frexit referendum within the first 6 months after she was elected. So that concentrated their minds. And then last November, the election of Donald Trump truly put the fear of God into them, because Trump said he was opposed to the EU. He had no respect for it. He didn't think that this kind of international organization was the way to go. And what's more, he said that NATO was obsolete. Now, that's a statement that he's since walked back, but it leaves all Europeans, not just the French, wondering exactly what the American commitment remains to Europe. And the end of the American guarantee, the ironclad American guarantee that has lasted since World War II, I think is one of the things that made them really worry about electing a potential Putin ally, because, as you know, Marine Le Pen borrowed money from Putin, from Russia, from Russian banks, to finance her campaign. So the French were quite wary of that.
Dr. Arthur Goldhammer, who's from the Centre for European Studies at Harvard University, has a PhD in maths, and he's translated over 120 books from French to English. Quite an extraordinary fellow. His writing about France is hard to beat.